A few months ago I talked about the consequences of the lockdowns in Portugal and the nefarious effects that they would have in our already very problematic economy, all thanks to socialist policies. Socialist policies that much before the pandemic had already thrown Portugal into a downward spiral that resulted on extremely bad results for 25 years. 25 years of which 19 were with socialists and communists in government, 4 years to manage the bankruptcy caused by socialists in 2011, and 2 years of a center and center-left coalition right after the socialist government of António Guterres that nearly bankrupted the country. During the pandemic, I mentioned that the socialist government was constantly making promises to help companies in trouble, specifically with layoffs. However, the government would claim that they would start helping on a certain date, and that date would go by, but no help would be given. Then they would set another date, and again that date would go by, and no help would be given. This happened several times, and companies continued to receive little to no support. Several months later, we can now quantify just how bad the socialist government did, with more and more data about the situation of companies in Portugal, plus the overall report by OECD on the impact of the lockdowns in companies. If you recall, the OECD is the organization that easily submits itself to the requests of governments, namely the Portuguese socialist government asking the OECD to remove or rewrite its chapter on corruption in Portugal because it was very, very bad. Essentially, if the OECD report says something bad about your country, you can be sure it's much worse than what they published. In regards to the impact of the lockdowns in companies, the OECD report concerning Portugal is just catastrophic. Only around 21% of companies actually received support from the government. Also, around 25% of companies with sales drops of more than 40% received absolutely no support from the Portuguese government. So in effect, barely any company actually received support from the socialist government. And this is the same government that didn't spare anyone from paying taxes in Portugal. In fact, the tax burden in Portugal increased during the pandemic, making Portugal one of the few on OECD's list to actually increase it. Portugal is also one of the countries in Europe with the highest taxes generally, taking into account the fact that it's also one of the countries with the lowest wages. Corporate taxes specifically are insanely high. Portugal was in 8th place out of 109 countries all over the world with the highest corporate taxes, which is one of the reasons why investment in Portugal is so low or non-existent. Obviously, those most hit by all of this are small and medium-sized companies that do not have the resources to survive more than a year of lockdowns and still have to pay extremely high taxes. And the result will be that they will either return as an even smaller company or not return at all. And many will indeed not return because bankruptcies in Portugal are skyrocketing. Portugal is actually the second worst in Europe in this regard. If you followed my videos, none of this is a big surprise because the catastrophic results for Portugal are in line with what socialism brings to any country: poverty, misery, and never-ending corruption. And the data that I'm showing you here is just the beginning, with the tendency to be much worse in the next months. And with the socialist government preparing to immediately spend the money coming from the European Union, with more contracts made for companies from socialist friends or socialist family members, and the nationalization of companies that are nothing more than a black hole for the taxpayer money, you can be sure that it will be much worse, because money doesn't grow on trees and socialists love to spend someone else's money. I hope you like this, and I'll see you next time.